So Steve, I've been looking at your work, and it's interesting to see that you are both an artist and you also have a business background as well, which makes a nice combination, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it was done that way round.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I think I started as an artist and then school beat that out of me, and then I went into the business world and sort of gone full circle, really, I think.
Yeah, because I think, the integration between art and the entrepreneurial skills that you have, it's that combination makes it more powerful in some ways. The reason I say that is because I know a lot of artists who find it very difficult to market their work. They find it very difficult to receive feedback on their work. Whereas when you're an entrepreneur, there seems to be a greater sense of resilience that you are open to receiving feedback. Not everyone's going to like your work.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, I think artist or entrepreneur or whatever is just, it's a convenient label. It all sort of blurs into one, to be honest, for me. I couldn't say this is artwork, this is business work. It's all become the same thing over the years.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, somebody said a couple of days ago that some people try to commercialize their passion. An artist may be very passionate about their work, but commercializing that passion is very different, isn't it? Because then it is to do with evaluation. You might be very passionate about your work and love it, your family loves it, but whether you're going to be able to claim value in terms of getting people to pay for it, that's a very different matter altogether, isn't it?
And it's not, I think that's spot on. And it's not just around whether you make money for it. I think anything I do going into the intention of making money takes all of the joy out of it anyway. So I literally, I'm such a selfish person. I make for me. All of my projects are for me. All of my work is for me. And if someone else likes it, then it's an added bonus. And it's bizarre. It's the same with, you'll know through your work, it's the same with writing. It's the same with anything. That it seems to me that if I do stuff just because I'm interested in it, someone else will be interested in it. The moment when I started blogging in 2012, I used to try and write these really clever blogs. I think, oh, this is wonderful, people will love it. And it would just go, bleh. And then I'd write something that was just my raw confusion and then everyone would love it. So I think it's counterintuitive, but it works for me anyway.
Well, this is what I find with the conversations. This is the 4th year that I'm running this conference.
Yeah, wow.
The very first conference that I did in 2017, it took me about 8 months to plan that conference. And I had people doing presentations like your TED Talk presentations. You know how long it takes to prepare a TED Talk?
Yeah.
Months, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, that's how the first conference was. I had 6 speakers who spent at least 6 months working on their speeches, rehearsing them. We gave feedback, and so I had 6 speeches and I had 30 conversations. And what I noticed was that the conversations were more popular than the actual presentations. And so the next year I thought, well, why spend all these months rehearsing speeches when the conversation is just as good and it doesn't require preparation? It can be improvised.
Yeah. And I think there's some magic in that. It's almost like you're just connecting at a relational level as human beings. And I've sort of had to unlearn what I learned in doing that. Like the importance of, I'm not anti-preparation or anti-planning, but just to hold it lightly, I think is important. And the whole TED thing's really interesting because it sort of ends up, my experience was when I did my talk, which was, 2017 or 2018 or something, I was lucky because I was paired with a TED coach who got it. My talk was about shame and the inner critic and imperfection and all of that. And I said to her right at the start, look, I'm happy to work on it with you, but I don't want to rehearse it. Otherwise, it would be totally incongruent. And so we sort of had some rough structure to it, but the rest was allowed to be improvised. And I think people find that compelling. So a couple of years later, I did an experiment, a project called Inexpert 2018, which I thought, what would happen if we did the opposite of TED? And I hired a big theatre and got it sold out 100 seats. And all of the speakers gave talks on subjects they were passionate about but had no expertise in and no rehearsal. And it was amazing. It was just so much more compelling because you're just witnessing human beings being flawed and human together.
Yeah, there's a time and place for both, I suppose.
Yeah.
And in a way, this a planned and very, very well rehearsed speech is totally different to what you call improvisation, and that's where the emergence comes in. The emergent speech is likely to be more creative in the live moment than the planned one.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I quite like the reassurance of an airline pilot giving me his or her well-rehearsed speech, rather than improvising and going off at tangents. So that there is a time and place for both. But as you say, if we're interested in novelty and creativity and exploring what it means to be human, I think it's way more fascinating to work out what it is as you go along.
And then let's talk about presence, emergence, and impact then. So in terms of presence, we can talk about our physical presence. We can talk about the presence of our identities, your identity as an artist, your identity as a business person, your identity as a speaker. Think about like your on-stage presence and your presence in social media, your presence in a virtual platform. For you, how do you perceive your presence, and how do you make your presence felt?
Yeah, okay. I think it's, I struggle with a lot of what's written about presence and authenticity and things like that, because it feels like we're striving to be something other than we are. And I've had a huge interest in Gestalt psychology and psychotherapy for years. So for me, presence is really finding myself in that flow state, where I'm just following a line of interest or something that's live and real for me in that moment, and responding to the audience and how they respond to it. Same with artwork. I hate artwork that I start when I know what it's going to look like in the end. So for me, it's that finding that flow state where there's an absence of self-judgment, there's an absence of script. I mean, there's an intention, I think. Even in improvisation, there's an intention, and there's a rough plan. But they're the best moments, I think, when I get to the end of something and it's like I suddenly come out of a trance and go, all right, I don't remember any of that. And that seems to be what my presence is, if we was going to describe it that way. Is I spent so many years trying to be everything other than I am, to be more professional, to be more eloquent, to be more intelligent, all of those things. And I think I'm at my best and most present when all of that is absence. I don't know if that makes any sense. That's how it feels for me. Like at this moment, I'm fascinated in interacting with you, and I don't know what we're going to say next, but I'm totally immersed in our interaction.
Yeah, and this kind of presence, even though we're not physically present with each other, we are speaking in a virtual environment, is very different to your presence when you were doing that TED speech, for example.
Yeah, I mean, for a start, on a big stage, you can't see anyone. So there's a part of it thinking, is anyone actually there? But I think fundamentally it's the presence is that good contact in Gestalt terms between human beings, and it is slightly different, as you say, or drastically different, whether it's virtual, whether it's with people you know or not. But for me, it's sort of tuning into what are the quiet voices, what are the quiet signals, what are the quiet sensations, what are the quiet thoughts in that moment, and just letting them emerge, I think, which leads nicely into the emergence thing. I think the two things they're symbiotic, they feed each other.
That's right. Yeah, there's that feedback loop. And it's this creativity that emerges when two minds, or more than two minds, they're acting as a stimulus for each other. So it's that movement that's created through in between. It's the in between spaces, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's that dance that I find really interesting. And in the projects I do, such a one that I'm literally just finishing after 2.5 years, is the Sound of Silence, which is the world's first silent podcast featuring special guests. And all of my projects start from that. I mean, I might be force-fitting it to what you're saying, but I think it's true. They start from that presence of, actually, no, I'm really interested in something here. What would the opposite of a podcast be? What would happen if I collected and broadcast silence? So it's sort of just an instinctive thing, that's not thought through any more than that. And from that initial idea or sensation or something, then it emerges just with little nudges, and sort of nudge and nurture the plan for all of my projects. And then noticing what happens next, or how other people respond, and then nudging and nurturing it, and the whole thing sort of co-creates itself.
Yeah, that is very interesting. So presence and absence and spaces and silence. And so how silence can be very powerful. It has, it can be dynamic rather than simply passive. So how is it, tell me more about this sound of silence. What emerges from this sound of silence then for you?
I mean, I think we'd need another 7 hours for me to make sense of it. But I mean, the project came about pretty much through, I'm interested in doing the opposite of what's normal, just to see if we can unstick things. And I think I got sent another leadership podcast, which I'm not anti-podcast, but I just thought there's so many of these leadership podcasts out there with the answers and these life hacks, and we're all a bit distracted by our digital presence at the moment. What would the opposite be? How could I create the opposite of a distraction that people would download? And then from that it evolved. So I like to leap then look with my projects. So I just put on social media, I'm doing the world's first silent podcast featuring special guests. So I know some silent stuff's been done before. John Cage did a silent record years ago. But I thought, no, what if I find guests and sit with guests? And then just started broadcasting it. I said there'll only be 100 episodes. One will go out every week. And in each episode, I sit face to face with someone and record 2 minutes of silence with them. And that's literally all the project has been. There's so much that has come from it. Is exactly as you say, silence isn't empty. Every single silence has been totally unique and different. It's a thumbprint of that moment and my relationship with that person. Some of them have been funny. Some of them have been somber. Some of them have been thoughtful. One of them, the person I was with, sobbed throughout. And there's so much to it. People have been seeking it out to listen to. I mean, the thing that I love about it is because it's not about anything, it can be about everything. And I get emails from people saying, oh, I love that podcast. It's about mindfulness. Or I love your podcast. It's about peace. Or I love your podcast. It's about anxiety and mental health. And my response is always, yeah, it could be about bus spotting if you want it to be. Because it's empty. We fill it with whatever we need in that moment. It's like an enabling structure or a liberating structure. And it is 2 minutes of me just sitting with people. Plus, I love the counterintuitive. I just love describing the fact that it's a silent podcast. And I've had some really world-renowned famous people on it that are my heroes, and I've sat in silence with them. It's bizarre. I like describing my work and people go, what, really? I like it when people don't get it.
Yeah. And so as you say, like there's that dynamic energy, even though you might not be sitting with them face to face physically, or do you sit with them?
Yeah, they're all face to face. I always create enabling constraints in these projects. So there's an intention. So this is sort of presence, emergence, impact, I guess. The intention is, it starts from a question. I want to explore silence through the means of a podcast. Then the constraints were only 100 episodes, 2 minutes of silence, recorded always face to face with a guest, which has meant I've spent the last 2.5 years traveling around mainly the UK at my own expense, sitting with people. Because I thought, it would be too easy to just do it like this. And there's something around the traveling to the silence. I have vivid memories of every single place I've recorded. Something on the beach, one I recorded in a prison cell, another one I recorded backstage at a theatre. And that face-to-face thing means that those 2 minutes are imbued with all sorts of memories and sensations and smells and feelings and emotions that wouldn't be quite the same if I recorded them all from here. So yes, they are all face-to-face is the short answer.
Yeah. And it seems as though they have just actually engaging in this work has made an impact on you.
Yeah. It's it naturally does without seeking it to have an impact. So it starts with an interest or an intent. I'm always full of questions. I'm not that interested in answers. I'm interested in the questions behind the questions, and then the question behind that. So getting deeper and deeper into not knowing. And the impact of me at this project has been not only, I was going to say a better understanding of silence, but I don't mean that. I mean an exploration of silence. It's taught a lot about me around how anxious I am as a person, how socially awkward I am as a person. I mean, after 200 minutes of sitting with random people in silence, I still find it really difficult. And I recorded the last one 2 days ago. It's taught me a lot early on about my own social echo chambers, which I have quite a diverse network. But when I was looking for people to record with, I thought, wow, this is a bit of an echo chamber. And eventually broke out of that, and at least 60% of the guests I'd never met before. And it's a lot. It ended up being a philosophical project, which I didn't intend it to be, because I love designing impermanence into my projects. Rather than getting something think this is going to be good forever, is to start and say this is when it's going to end. And that was so profound with this project because there's only 100 episodes. So each episode then became even more special. It almost became like a metaphor for life. Then when I switched from episode 50 to 51, there's less episodes left than there have been, which as a middle-aged man, or as middle-aged anyone, it's like you get that moment thinking, actually, no, there's less left than there has been. Then there are moments of loving the project and hating it. And then the last few weeks of it just went so quickly. And so for me, that immediately provokes the philosopher in me to think, all right, this is a metaphor of life. So I don't know everything that I've learned from it, but it's been so profound as a project that just started off with me thinking, I wonder what the opposite of a podcast would be.
Yeah, and I suppose that was that thought, the thought that arose from the question you asked yourself became the seed. And each of those episodes in itself, a seed led to, because, it was only a 2-minute recording of you sitting face to face, and I'm sure that 2-minute led to conversations that happened.
Yeah. I mean, that was the brilliant thing about it, and the crazy thing about it. So I do a very short introduction for my guests, just so people listening know whose silence they're listening to. I mean, it's literally a few seconds, and my guest says hello to signify they're there, and then it's silence. But we had amazing conversations around them. But we didn't record those bits, which is the opposite of what a podcast would normally be, because you'd have all the conversations in there. And just wonderful things like the former hostage, Terry Waite. I don't know if you remember him from, I think it was late 80s, early 90s. I spent the day at his house and we recorded 2 minutes of silence. But all the stuff around that was amazing. We had an entire day talking philosophy, religion, his experience in captivity, society. And it's that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't invited him to silence.
I remember when he was released, I think it was 1992.
Yeah.
He was released. So,
yeah,
I remember, so just this conversation brings me back to that time. And that, I know exactly where I was. I was at work and one of my colleagues came in and said, Terry Waite's been released. And
and that's the whole Terry Waite thing was never an intention. And this is what I love about following a project where it goes. It's like my role is, I've had the seed, and I have such a busy mind. I'll have ideas for 10 projects a day. Most of them don't go anywhere. I don't give myself a hard time. But one of them, the seed will fertilize and grow like this one. And I also like, as an improviser, the idea of incorporating error or incorporating mistakes. Or when something goes wrong, thinking, right, okay, how can I use this? And so the Terry Waite thing was a total accident because I forgot to take a photo of someone else. It was a complete accident. So I recorded an episode in London with someone, did the recording, and the other constraint that I put in is every guest, I took a photo of them holding the same logo, the original logo. And this lady, Andrea, left, and I thought, oh no, I've forgotten to take another photo. I can't put the episode out because I've set myself these rules. So I wrote to Andrea and said, I forgot to take your photo. Can I take it another time? And she said to me, why don't you come up to Nottingham and visit the museum that she's a curator at? It's the National Museum of Justice. And she said, we can take a photo in the prison cells. And I thought, oh, right, that sounds good. Oh, in fact, why don't we re-record the silence in the prison cells? So we went down into these underground sort of 18th century isolation cells, pitch black, dark, horrible places. And while I was sitting in there in the silence, I heard footsteps in the distance. And hearing the footsteps in the distance reminded me of hearing Terry Waite talk 5 years before about hearing footsteps and not knowing if footsteps meant freedom, food, or death. And I thought, oh yeah, maybe I should ask Terry Waite on this. So I did, and he did it. But if I'd remembered to take Andrea's photograph, none of that chain of events would have happened. And I find that amazing, just this little sequence of stuff.
Yes, that's right. Synchronicity and being in the right place at the right time. And earlier on, you talked about the difference between planning and emergence. And the thought that came to my mind is, I have a beautiful lawn, and this year I planted meadow seeds, flowers, you know, and the way I planted them was just scattering them. You get like a packet and you just don't know what the mix is going to be, and all you need is that space, and you just scatter
lovely.
That is emergence. You know, all these plants that have emerged from me scattering those seeds, they were not imagined, they were not planned, they were not foreseen. Whereas for some situations, you do have to plant the seed in the right place at the right time, and perhaps in a straight line, like sunflowers, perhaps.
Yeah, right. And like you say, it's neither's good nor bad. They're different, aren't they? I mean, when I cross the road, I'm quite structured about that because I don't want to get run over. If I'm traveling somewhere, I mean, this is the thing that I think people get confused about is I love to be incredibly organized with traveling. I want to know what time. I give myself plenty of time. I check the routes, I check the traffic almost obsessively. I get freaked out if I haven't pre-booked the seat on a plane that I want. But then it's this world of just enough structure, isn't it? If I'd planned the Sound of Silence project, I probably would have got bored of it, is one thing. But the other thing is it wouldn't have ended up being as magical as I wanted it to be. So it's what's this world of just enough? What's just enough structure? What's just enough sense of safety that the rest can emerge? And quite often it's, again, when I spent 20 years working for a big corporate and in a sort of OD change leadership role. And part of my whole ongoing battle and what I got known for in there was helping to just dial down structure enough so it was helpful. Because otherwise we end up being obsessed with a map. It's like a sat nav, isn't it? You end up like driving into a river or something because you're not paying attention to what's going on. And even in performance improvisation, there's an ongoing light structuring or some navigation aids in that to create the emergence.
That's right. And as a consultant, I'm sure there were many situations where perhaps you had clear outcomes that the client wanted you to meet, you know, tangible outcomes. And emergence is counterintuitive to that. You know, with emergence, you can't sell the plan that, well, let's just see what happens, let's just see what emerges from this, because that's not they're not as willing to pay for that as the outcomes that they've outlined.
And I think that's the challenge, isn't it? I mean, I was faculty on the Ashridge Masters in Organisational Change and Consulting for years, which I did previously, and that helped me so much find a language to sort of navigate that schism. I don't know if schism's the right word. Of a client saying, we want this and we want you to guarantee this because that other organisation has guaranteed it. And I'd feel unethical selling that because I don't know. So I think there's a sort of, again, a language of in-betweenness where, I mean, I know I still do a lot of consulting work where a client will say, we want this. And I say, okay, that's what we're aiming for. This is what might happen. This is what we might do. But we need to work on this as a partnership. There's experiment, reflection, response. And sometimes you can find that helpful middle ground. And it works brilliantly because we're in it together. And then other times it's just, no, another big consultancy is guaranteed success, we'll go with them. But I literally can't do it because I've done it before where I've gone into that work and sort of been lured into selling certainty and I've ended up hating it. It's been rubbish.
And it's the same with teaching work, you know, like when you were...
Yeah, I can imagine.
when you get students at the beginning of the year, they want to be certain that you're going to guide them to achieving that qualification at the end of
Yeah.
it, rather than just saying,
Yeah.
I'll teach you and let's just wait and see what emerges.
Yeah.
Students are not
And
willing
it's,
to pay for that.
well, and similar in coaching, I think with any interaction that I'm doing, the thing that I'm looking for early on is, what is the possibility of us co-inquiring in this together? We're in it together. It's an adventure. I bring a skill set, you bring a skill set, and we're going to discover what it is as we go along. We've got an intention, we're aiming somewhere, but we may go off at all sorts of tangents. I've read, I'd only discovered the term recently of a thing called the Nuffield Syllabus, which you may know about. It's my understanding was, it was in an autobiography I was reading, is the Nuffield Syllabus. I mean, I would have gotten so much better at school if I'd been taught in that way. The way I understand it, and it'd be good to see if I've understood it correctly, was traditionally, say, like in science, there'd be a list of experiments you do. This is what you're inquiring into. Whereas the Nuffield Syllabus would say to the student, what are you interested in finding out? Then design some experiments in order to. Is that what it is?
Well,
Yep.
I'm not that familiar with it.
All right, no, good.
Good about it.
But that way appeals to me so much more. If what am I interested in? Can I design some experiments to inquire into it? And that way of working, for me, works best if someone's working with me, I'm the coachee or the therapy client, and the other way around, where we're in it together. And it's like, what are you interested in? Here's some experiments. We don't know what's going to happen, but they're towards what you're interested in. And then you discover all sorts of unexpected gems along the way. Quite often people will come to a conclusion, actually that thing that I was after, I really have no interest in it. Whereas we would have been blindly running towards it otherwise. But it doesn't sell, does it? I wrote a blog years ago saying certainty sells.
That's right. Yeah, certainty sells.
And that's why we're so stuck. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So certainty, comfort, security.
Yeah. And it's this whole thing of, I think it was Ralph Stacey wrote years ago that most of the stuff organisations do, the traditions of organisations, are institutional defences against anxiety. So, and a lot of it is. I mean, you think of, and there's some good to them. I understand why there are procurement processes, and at the same time, they tend to inhibit any novelty ever actually happening. And you just get this chasing the silver bullet or chasing the utopian solution in culture change, don't you? Where there's an organisation saying we want to be more creative, so we're going to do this one thing that's been guaranteed, and it doesn't work, so then we do the next thing. And it's rare, but when you get those moments, they're organisations I've worked with for years that have been able to work with in that way. But it's just the traditions that get in the way. Like, how do you charge for that? How do you price that? I don't know.
Yeah, it's about, the value of something. It's, if something is the more complex something is, the harder it can be to discern the integral value of it.
Yeah. And I've had some bizarre things consulting where I've refused to do like RFP, requests for proposals and stuff, because I'm saying, I'm not even sure what you're after yet. I'd like to start in a conversation, and then eventually having a conversation, and the client saying, oh yeah, actually we do want something different, and then writing a proposal. And I remember once procurement said to me, how much are you going to charge for this? And it's like, I don't know what it is yet, so I've no idea. I've genuinely no idea. I'll work within your budget. And they said, no, we need a number. So I said, here's a typical number, but it won't be that. And then about a month later, I got an email back saying, you're too expensive. And it's like, I didn't even give you a number. What? This is crazy. And the client said, we really want to work with you, but we can't. And it's such a weird standoff, isn't it? None of this stuff's real. It's like lemmings walking off a cliff.
Yeah. So Steve, so finally, just to sum up then, for you, what do you think is most important for us to think about in terms of presence and emergence and impact?
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's an idea that captivated me years ago from Arnie Mindell, which was about the idea of quantum flirting. And my oversimplified version of it is that traditionally I might say, I've chosen to notice the magnolia tree out of my window. Whereas the idea of quantum flirting flips that, saying that in that moment I was open to hearing the call of that magnolia tree. And I think that particularly with creativity, the presence is being open to inspiration rather than seeking it, of being open to ideas, of being open to feeling and sensation, and then just following them, like just following them and nurturing them and allowing them to emerge. And that, in my experience with all of the projects I've done, if you want global massive impact, which is probably an illusion anyway, you won't get it that way. But the smaller amount of people it impacts, it'll be really profound, because it is all grown organically from everything. I don't know if that makes any sense. I might listen back to that and think, oh, what a load of rubbish, but it makes sense to me in that moment.
Yes, it does. It does make sense. I think too many people start focusing on wanting to be famous and making lots of money, and they don't spend enough time thinking about the value that they're creating.
Yeah, and it can, and it's the same with talks. I think people are fascinated by stories, and if people are fascinated by stories and fascinated by interests, then eventually it will turn into some sort of relationship that may or may not be a paying relationship, but it sort of grows that way, I think. But then I absolutely hate selling stuff. I hate being sold to. So I have a real aversion to the traditional ways of doing things, especially as an introvert.
Right. Yes, I've seen your LinkedIn website. You try and keep out salespeople, don't you?
That's become a brilliant game. That has of. I mean, it's the thing about the salespeople, and they're trying to make a living as well, which I totally respect. But I'll get an emails asking, can they have a 5-minute call about my automated recruitment needs? And it's like, have you read my profile? So I have fun with them. I play Buckaroo with them, which is, do you remember the old game Buckaroo where you used to put things on the donkey? I see how long I can keep them talking for, getting increasingly bizarre until they give up. And then at least we both have a laugh out of it.
Okay, well, Steve, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. And
likewise.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll have a conversation again, if not within the year, at least for the next Creativity and Culture Conference next year.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, bye for now.
Thanks, bye.
Okay.